everyone. I am so happy to be back here with you, whether you're watching this live or you're watching the recording. And again, today we're going to get a little bit more technical into the science behind universal design for learning. And if you did not come to the first session, really simply, if we unpack this idea of universal design for learning, we want to be able to design learning experiences in every classroom, in every school, so that every student can be included and every student can learn. And that's what we mean by universal design for learning. How do we design a learning experience that works equally well for all learners? And in order to do that, we really have to focus on firm goals and flexible means, because human beings are just beautifully and wildly diverse and dynamic. We are different from each other and our needs are always changing. So today we're going to be diving into how we can design learning in a way that allows all learners to be included and learn at high levels. And our goals for the session are, first of all, to really understand what we mean by the UDL principles. I'm going to get into the science behind universal design for learning and what we mean by the principles. And then we're going to talk about how we use the UDL principles and guidelines to identify and eliminate barriers that prevent students from learning. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about how in really flexible classrooms, it's important, first of all, for educators to be really flexible with design. And it's also really important that we help learners build agency to better understand who they are as learners so that they can take advantage of that flexibility and learn at high levels. The idea here is that every single day we are asking our learners to come in and focus on learning, and they have a lot of other things going on. And so, one of the kindest, most humane things that we can do is just recognize that we have these big, full lives that aren't paused when suddenly we are trying to learn at high levels. And so, I want you to think about how your day is going already. For some of us, it's the morning. For some of us, it's the evening. And so coming into this session, what is on your mind? Because we have things going on in our personal lives and our professional lives. And if we don't acknowledge those things and try to put them aside as best as we can, it's difficult to focus on our own learning. And so I want you to think about what is happening in your world and what can you do to be able to focus as much as possible for the next hour. And so you can use your chat just to share how your day is going. If you are comfortable doing that, you're welcome to just take a moment. And what I like to do before learning is I like to take out a notebook and just make a to-do list of all the things that I feel like I have to do, just so they have a place that I can hold them while I'm focusing. Maybe you just need a minute to get ready. You just need to go get a notebook. You need to turn off your notifications. And whenever we pause, I'm going to play music for 2 minutes. And I know that music is not going to work for everybody, but I want to honor the fact that for some of you, silence is hard, right? It almost feels uncomfortable. And so I'm going to put in a timer for 2 minutes and I'm going to play music. But the amazing thing about being able to do this via Zoom is that you can mute the music on your end. So not everybody has to listen to the music. It's there as an option if this helps you to focus, if it helps you to get ready for learning. So again, when I start my classes with students, I would often say, all right, everyone, I'm so happy that you're here. Let's just take a moment and let's think about how our days are going. And let's, if we can, let's put some of that aside so that we can focus as much as possible. And so if you want to write a quick note, if you want to take a deep breath, if you need to take your things out, I don't want you to feel flustered when I start in 2 minutes. And so what do you need? And then I would just walk around and say good morning or good afternoon to all of my students. I'm so happy you're here. How is that? The meeting that you had yesterday with your coach, hey, how's your grandmother doing? Right? It's a beautiful opportunity just to welcome like the whole self of a learner. So I want to offer that to you. So again, 2 minutes and you have options. So to get ready, you can share how you're doing in the chat. You can take a moment and write down some notes. You can just take a mindful minute to kind of transition from whatever you were doing into your own learning. And please mute the music if it's distracting to you in any way. Here we go. Okay. So we just took a minute. I'm going to stop sharing again. I don't know what is happening with my audio settings. Something must have gotten funky when I changed my audio settings for my mic. And so I think that I just fixed it now. So again, that's a great example of a universally designed inclusive welcome. So there is a prompt. You have lots of options for how you're going to address the prompt. It gives you some time for reflection. It gives some time if you're willing for connection. You're able to get yourself ready. And again, just a reminder, if you would like access to the slides, if that's more accessible to you, then you can access that now. So, as we move through our work today, the first thing I want to talk about is just understanding and unpacking something that we call the UDL guidelines, which is really a visual blueprint that organizes all of the research on inclusive practice. And so, when we're talking about this, we're going to start off by talking about the core tenets. And these core tenets really are the foundational beliefs that we need to have if we're going to universally design learning. And so we talked about this in the first webinar, but I want to review it just in case you weren't here, which is that there are three things that practitioners who are looking to design learning for all students have to embrace. The first is human variability, is that we are different from each other and we're always changing. And as a result of that, we will never really know what someone needs if they do not help us figure that out. We're not doing things to students, we're doing things with students. And so there's this beautiful quote when you look at the equity space, which is nothing for us without us. Don't do anything for us without us. And there's something really beautiful about that is that we really have to lean in and say, what is it that you need? Right? Equity, as Chris Emden says, is hearing someone's voice about what they need and working to provide them with that. And so human variability isn't just that we're different from each other, it's that our needs are changing. And I just don't have the power and the privilege to know exactly what you need at this moment. But I do have the opportunity always to say, listen, this is what the firm goals are. This is what is not negotiable. And I want to be flexible so that you can really think about where you are at as a learner and that you can choose what you need. Because I know that if I'm not flexible, there are going to be some people who will not be able to access learning. And so it's not only about this flexibility, but it's about saying, I honor you. I honor your right to choose what you need, and I will support you to try to figure that out. And so it's a very, very incredibly dynamic framework because what we're saying is, I know that you are different from each other and you're different from me, but also we live in this beautiful world that the context really changes who we are and what we need. So I'm going to design with firm goals and flexible means. And then I'm also going to create an environment where you have the time and the space to figure out what you need so that you can do your best work, so you can learn at your highest levels. And so this starts to lead to the science of universal design for learning. And I love to explain really physiological, really biological, the neuroscience of UDL with analogies. And so I want you to follow this analogy. I'm going to talk a little bit about how heating systems work, because when you are in a place in the world that is absolutely freezing cold, you have a couple of options. You can do wood fire stoves, you can do pellet stoves, and you can do a hot air ventilation system. Okay. And so this right here is an image of an HVAC system that stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And so, in places in the world where it gets like really hot and really cool, we all have very, very different ways to heat and cool our spaces. And one way is a heating and ventilation system. And so, I want you to imagine that you are in some space in the world and there is a forced hot air system. And there are three major networks in a forced hot air system: the thermostat, where you set the temperature you want. Now, this is Fahrenheit for all of you around the world who are dealing in Celsius. I do not want my house to be 70 degrees Celsius. So this is 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it's about 25 degrees Celsius. And so what I want to do is I want to set the temperature. Okay. And that's how I turn on the system. I set the temperature on the thermostat. And then the thermostat somehow communicates with the burner. And the burner receives the messages from the thermostats and it says, "Ooh, I have to heat up." And it gets hot. It starts boiling, right? It's called a boiler or a burner. And it starts getting really, really hot. And it starts kind of producing this steam. However, a lot of the time, a burner is in the basement. And so if you are, upstairs, you're not going to get the heat from the basement unless there is a blower, the fan that's going to push that hot air out of the burner all through a space. Okay. And so all three parts of a heating system have to be working or the heat is not going to distribute. Now, the brain is actually very similar in that there are three main networks in the brain that are responsible for learning. The first is the affective network of the brain. And that is essentially where you program this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. It's all about setting the goals, it's about setting purpose. And so we always want to start our learning journeys with saying, this is what we're doing today, and this is why we're doing it. And these are the options that you're going to have. And so let's turn on the learning brain by getting everyone interested and let's get everyone willing to put in some effort. Okay. So we're setting the purpose, right? We're setting the goal. And then we have to design instruction in a way that the recognition network of the brain starts taking in all of this information. And ultimately, the synapses start firing just like a burner, right? Is you sometimes can see in someone's face, in someone's eyes when they get something, they're like, right? It's because those synapses are firing off. It's because the brain has kind of recognized this message and it's saying, oh my goodness, right? Wow, this is awesome. I'm building understanding. It starts getting hot. But the only way that we as instructors know whether or not that knowledge has been, as knowledge has landed, is if they somehow express that to us, right? There needs to be some sort of system for students to share with us what they've learned so that we can measure it on the other end. Okay. So again, we have this heating system and we say we're going to set the purpose or the temperature. We need the burner to receive that message, and then we need the blower to be able to express, right? And then on the other end of that, I can measure it. Now, in learning, I need students to understand this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. I need instruction to be accessible so that students are able to make meaning. And then I need to design assessments so that students can share what they know so I can measure it on the other end. And so those three networks of the brain, the affective network, the recognition network, and the strategic network, all have to be activated if learners are going to learn. And we can actually see this using fMRI brain scans. You can see when these parts of the brains are activated because the synapses start firing. And so knowing this about brain networks leads us to, if we are going to activate the affective network of the brain, we have to design instruction using multiple means of engagement. We're going to make more sense of this in a moment. If we want all students' recognition networks to be activated, we have to design instruction using multiple means of representation. And if we want all students to be able to share what they are learning with us, we have to design with multiple means of action and expression. So if we go back a slide, I want you to think of these networks as like, why are we learning? What are we learning? And how are we sharing what we've learned? Okay. So sometimes you can think of this really simply as engagement, the teaching or the design of instruction, and assessment. So this is where the UDL guidelines come together. Because what you'll notice is at the top of these guidelines, you'll see the brains that I just talked about, right? This is the affective network of the brain, this is the recognition network of the brain, and this is the strategic network of the brain. And if we're going to engage all students, we have to understand, what is engagement? If I want every part of that affective network to light up, right? What does that mean? And so the first thing you have to know is that each of the principles essentially are describing, right? What is engagement? There are three things that are true of engagement. If a learner is engaged, three things have to be true. One, they feel welcome, they feel interested, and they feel like they belong. Okay. To be engaged, you have to feel like, you know what, this is worth my time. I belong here. I want to pay attention. Okay. It also means that you have to be willing to put in some sort of effort and persistence. You have to be able to channel your attention, channel your focus. There has to be a willingness to buy into the learning. And because learning at high levels requires some cognitive dissonance, you have to have the emotional capacity to deal with learning as cognitive dissonance, learning as sometimes discomfort. So if three things have to be true for engagement, right? What is engagement? Engagement is feeling welcome, putting in effort, and having the emotional capacity to stick with things that are hard. Okay. What are the three biggest barriers to engagement? It's the same exact thing. So when a learner's brain is not activated, right, when they are not engaged, and people say all over the world, my students are not engaged, there are three reasons based in the research why they're not engaged. One is they are not interested, they do not care, they do not feel welcome. There's a beautiful TED talk by a woman named Rita Pearson, and she says in it, kids don't learn a lot from teachers they don't like, right? We want kids to be interested in learning, but we also want to make sure that they feel welcome, that this is a place they want to be. And so as we're looking at this, we say, okay, so I need for students to learn, I need them to be interested, I need them to put in effort and persistence, and I need them to build emotional capacity. How do we even know that? Did someone just make that up? No, no one made it up. This is where we start looking at the research. So I am going to move to the UDL guidelines right now. I'm also going to put it into the chat so you can see how to navigate the research. So just as I had shared, if you go down to this site, you can realize that I say, okay, tell me more about engagement. And we go through here and it talks about what engagement is from the like learning and the brain perspective. Okay, what actually is engagement? Okay, and it talks a little bit about how we have to be able to bring our authentic selves. We have to feel interested. We have to be willing to put in effort. We have to see that it's worthwhile. And then it talks about that there are essentially three guidelines for engagement. The first is you have to feel welcome, you have to feel interested. And if you click on this is all of the research, really good, gold standard, peer reviewed, scholarly research that says this is the research that shows us, and again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies that talk about how if students are interested, their learning outcomes are much higher. If students are not interested, their learning outcomes are compromised. The same is true as feeling welcome. And so what you can see is students do better when educators have really accessible attitudes towards flexibility, when we embrace student identity, when we recognize the huge asset that multilingual learners bring to our learning environments, when we think about what it means to be culturally responsive, when we recognize and eliminate cultural stressors. Now, this is just about what does it mean to be engaged, right? We know that engagement means welcome and interest. Now, what if you say, well, I don't really feel like my learners are really interested? In a survey, they don't feel welcome. That's when we go to the considerations, and these go in order. So if my students are not engaged, the first thing I have to ask myself as an educator is, do they feel welcome? Do they feel interested? We can ask students that ourselves. We could do anonymous surveys. We could do focus groups. And then if the answer is not yet, we start with this first consideration. And we say, well, what's the first thing that we need to do if my learners don't feel interested, if my learners don't feel welcome? The first thing is I have to start giving them choice. Because if they're not interested, it's because they have no autonomy, right? I have to give them choice. Now, again, what you'll notice here, this is all of the research about the value of choice. And so it goes through again hundreds and hundreds of research studies, right? And we're going way back on the research on just the value of choice because I might maybe not be super interested in what we're learning about in science, but as a very extroverted person, I am very interested in working with other people. So I'm going to feel more welcome when you say, listen, you can stand up as you're learning. You can work together on this. You might be able to choose your topic. If we're talking about, let's say, infectious diseases, maybe you can choose the disease that's most interesting to you. You can choose how you're learning. You can choose how you're sharing what you're learning, right? It's more interesting to me than sitting there passively and having education be something that is done to me. And so all of the UDL guidelines are organized like this. They do go in order. So we have to think about how do we essentially ensure that the learning brain is turned on? How do we set the thermostat? We start with engagement. Then we move over to once our learners are engaged, once they are motivated, once they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, once I've created a classroom community, then I can start thinking about, okay, now how do I design instruction? Now, the most traditional methods of instruction were printed text and lecture. But printed text is really problematic for a lot of learners. I can predict that there's going to be many learners who face significant barriers to printed text because of visual impairment, because of multilingual learning. They just don't decode in English yet, because of the lack of foundational reading skills. And so, if you cannot perceive a text, if you can't get anything out of that text, then you can't learn from it. Now, if I can make it perceptible by saying you can read this or listen to this, you still have to make sure that students have the language to make sense of it. And so with my glasses on, I am able to perceive a text in Spanish. I don't know Spanish, so I don't get anything out of it, even though I can perceive it. And if I can perceive it and I have the knowledge through great vocabulary instruction, through multimedia, through having language objectives, then there's a chance that I could build knowledge. So you see how it's like we have to first access the learning brain here. Then we have to build support. And then ultimately, the goal would be that our learners are able to focus on learning, build knowledge, and create strategies to share what they know. Now, what's so interesting about this is that a lot of people look at this blueprint as just being a checklist. And they'll say, you know what? I do this right here. I use multiple tools for students to share their learning, right? Because this right here is assessment. And so somebody says, I made a choice board and I wanted students to share their learning and it didn't work. And so my question would be, okay, are all students, do they feel like they belong in your classroom? Are they used to having options and choices? Does it feel safe to choose what they want? Were they super clear on what they were learning and why they were learning it and what the success criteria was? Do they feel a really positive connection to the class? Did you give them opportunities to say, all right, before we start today, ultimately, how do we ensure that we're all like working together as a learning community? And then did you design the instruction in a way that was flexible enough? Because if you didn't design the instruction flexibly, there's nothing for the learner to share with you on that choice board because you have to be engaged before you can learn, and you have to learn before you can share what you have learned. And so this is not a checklist that you just jump around and say, oh, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. It's more of how do we back up and say, what are the barriers that my learners are facing and how do I eliminate them through design? And what you'll notice is every single one of these things talks about options, 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 options. And so it's not to say, okay, listen, now you all have to complete this exact self reflection sheet, but you have to say, you know what, before we start today, think about how you're doing. Know that some people in this class are not in a great space. We have to be good to each other and we have to be good to ourselves. And so if you're not in a space today that you can collaborate really productively and we're not focusing on the skill of collaboration, honor yourself, take a beat. We've all been there and choose to work by yourself. That's okay. I'll come in and check on you and I'm going to be providing feedback. How do you want my feedback? Do you want me to write a quick note on your desk? Do you want me to whisper it? Do you want me to just put a sticker on there and say, come and talk to me later? Like, how can I support you? Because I want you to feel like you get to be exactly who you are in this class and you're safe with me and you're successful with me. But we have to work together to be able to do that. And so when we're talking about the UDL guidelines, we're really talking about what are the 9 biggest barriers that prevent learning, and they're right here. Students don't feel welcome, they're not willing to put in effort, or they're not able because it's out of the zone of their proximal development. They simply don't have the emotional capacity yet. They're unable to perceive the learning in the way that it's designed. They lack the language to be able to make sense, and so on and so forth. So these are the 9 barriers that we're looking to eliminate all of the time as we are moving forward as practitioners of UDL. So I want to just for a moment think about, if that's the science, what does that actually look like when we are in classrooms? Because the guidelines tend to look like a checklist, like we're going to do this one thing, we're going to do this one thing. None of those strategies in and of themselves are super innovative, right? We know it's important to give feedback to students. We know it's important for students to reflect. We know that it's important to set goals for learning and have instructional clarity. But ultimately, when it all comes together, when we're able to eliminate all barriers to learning, what does it look like? When students are engaged, what we see is we see significant instructional clarity. This is what we're doing today. This is why we're doing it. We see a really beautiful climate and culture, right? The classroom is designed, the kids are sitting and standing, they're working alone, they're working together, they have what they need to be successful. There's a real focus on building emotional literacy through just understanding the social and emotional needs of our children. We're focusing on building relationships among kids, the interdependence of collective learning. And there's lots of time for self reflection. There's lots of time for learners to think about what are they choosing and why are they choosing it. That's the environment, that's the climate. And within that climate, we want to make sure, of course, that there's flexible methods and materials for students to choose from, as well as flexible assessments when it is appropriate. But we also want to elevate student voice and to say, okay, what is it that you need today to be successful? Because I know that you'll be able to do this when we get the conditions right. And I can also ask this question of my colleagues: help me to eliminate these barriers, my families, my leaders. Okay. Because ultimately, what we're looking for is a classroom that meets the needs of all learners. And so the UDL look fors take the science of UDL, because I think there's a tendency for people to look at the UDL guidelines as a checklist and then to say, oh, I'm doing this already. But if we get into classrooms, we have to say, are all of these different guidelines coming together to create a learning environment that truly is universally designed? And if so, what are we looking for? Now, what you'll notice if you click on the link that I'm giving you right now, this is the tool that my colleagues and I use simply to get a sense of what are the strengths already in a school as it relates to designing for all students, and where are the opportunities for significant growth through professional development. And after this session, when you have more time, you might want to dive into the UDL guidelines to learn more. Maybe you want to access the UDL look fors. But I also designed a really short podcast. It's 10 minutes long, that talks about how do you know if something is universally designed. And really, really simply, it comes down to this: when something is universally designed, every student is included and every student is making progress and learning while having the same options. Every student is included, truly included. They're not integrated. They're not in the back of the room doing something different. They are a part of the classroom community. They feel like they belong. They understand what they're learning and why, and they have the flexibility to access what they need to access. And so I want to give you a pause here, because I know that this is a lot happening at the same time. So again, we often call these the UDL guidelines, but it comes down to the science of UDL is that if we want to activate the brains of all learners, we must recognize what it takes to actually learn. And it's engagement, recognition, and being able to share your learning. Okay. And so research tells us what those barriers are, and the guidelines are a tool to help us eliminate those barriers. So, how do those guidelines help us to identify potential barriers? Remember, the guidelines are the 9 most predictable barriers, right? but also how do the considerations help us to plan flexible pathways for learning? If we know that all of those have to be true for students to learn, the considerations help us to look at those differently. So you can either, if you're with a colleague, you can have a discussion. Of course, you can record some notes or use the chat to post your thoughts or post your questions. You can explore the UDL guidelines if you would like to, just to kind of start getting a sense of how they are organized. And then, of course, I'm going to play the music. Hopefully, the audio has worked itself out. And if that is distracting to you, you're just going to click mute for 2 minutes. So, again, this is the goal of this is to understand the three UDL principles, right? We have to have multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression, which really simply is we want all students to know why they're learning. We want them to have an opportunity to build understanding and understand what they're learning. And we want them to know how to share what they're learning. Okay. So 2 minutes, post any questions if you have them. And then we're going to get into this last piece, which is once we are flexible, how do we help students make more responsible decisions for their own learning by intentionally building learner agency? Okay, 2 minutes, go. All righty. All right, everyone. I know that the science of UDL is a lot, and it's a rabbit hole that you could spend your entire career diving into. But ultimately, it comes down to this: kids learn when they can. When the conditions are right, kids learn. And because of variability, the conditions kids need are very, very different, not only from student to student, but from day to day. And so we have to start thinking about always being really clear about this is what we're learning, this is why we're learning it. And we have to create a climate, we have to create conditions that support multiple tasks and formats at the same time if we want all learners to learn. And there was a really great question in the chat about, how do you deal with the pushback when teachers say there's just so much to cover, there's just so much to get through? And I think that it's a really good question to ask because I think sometimes external pressures make teachers feel like I have to cover all this. And so the first thing I always ask is, does covering everything at your pace increase the outcomes of all learners? Is your current pacing working for all learners, right? Because if every kid is currently included and is currently making significant progress, then I would say it is designed for all learners. But if the pacing becomes a barrier because we're more focused on coverage than we are on student learning, then we have to begin to lean in and talk about how we could maybe do this a little bit differently. And as a former high school and middle school teacher who taught in fully inclusive classrooms, so I worked in schools that previously had separate programs for everything, for behavior, for autism, for language-based learning, for life skills. And over time, we deconstructed those programs to ensure that there was inclusive programming. And when we did that, ultimately, there were some shifts in pacing that I had to make. However, I never, ever, ever had better learning outcomes than when I really step back and say, what are the priority standards? What is the most important thing that all learners really have to know and do? And sometimes we have to play the game of what is prioritized on external exams, truly, because unfortunately, we don't have the power or the privilege to minimize those, although it is my life's work to try to do that. And so understanding that as we look at all of the different things that students have to know and do, in some ways we have to figure out what is essential, what is the priority. And I also think a lot of the times that we as educators, myself included, tend to add a lot of things that are actually not construct relevant that add to our plate and make us feel like there's more to cover than there is. So, for example, I was an English teacher. And here in the United States, where I am from, there is zero requirement in our national curriculum, in our Common Core standards, to read a novel. There is no requirement for that. And we do have to make sure that students understand how characters interact over the course of a text. We want them to understand author's craft. We really need them to be able to identify theme and main ideas and understand how to summarize text. But there's no requirement for a page number or the number of novels. And as an English teacher, I would say, oh my gosh, like I'm so behind. I'm so behind. I have to get through these 10 novels. And that's really on me more than anything else. And so, again, I want to lean in to say, I know as an educator, you're struggling with changing this pacing because you don't want to take the risk that this is going to have worse results for your kids. I get that. And I see you and I love that. But let's take some time and really think about what is it that all students have to know and do? What is the absolute prerequisite? What is the most essential? And then how do we universally design units so that we can ensure that all of our students have that knowledge and those skills? So, sorry about that. As we think about this work moving forward, let's go into our last piece here, which is simply this idea of being flexible is only the first step. So, when we are flexible as instructors, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of our learners are going to make really brilliant decisions about their learning all the time. So, flexibility is the first thing. The next thing is ensuring that students can take advantage of that flexibility in a really responsible way. And so this right here is a picture of an omelet, which is a breakfast-based dish made of eggs. And I want you to imagine that in this omelet, there is cheese and there is bacon and there are these beautiful vegetables. And imagine also that I own chickens in the backyard and I am like getting these eggs from my chickens. I am getting the vegetables from my gardens. I'm spending an amazing, incredible amount of time on this omelet. And I think all of us could agree that this is a really high quality omelet. Can we agree on that, right? This is a high quality omelet, but it doesn't work for everybody. Not everyone can eat it, right? And so as much as this is high quality, it just doesn't work for everyone. And one thing that I always want to say to teachers when I'm working with them is please don't hear me as saying that what you're doing isn't high quality. Teachers are spending a tremendous amount of time to create learning environments and lessons for kids. And the truth is when those kids are included, it doesn't work. And so this is not about high quality. This is about it doesn't work for everybody yet. And so let's think about how we can design this differently. And so these are my four kids. I have four kids. My son turned 17 yesterday. So I have a 17-year-old son. I have twin 15-year-olds. And then I have my little guy. His name is Bowden. He's 11. And if I made that omelet for breakfast, despite my best efforts, despite the quality of that omelet, only Torin, who's on the right-hand side, will eat it. The others will not eat it. They are not interested in that. They do not like it. And that's just about engagement. They don't want to eat it. Right now, some of you can't eat it because you have a plant-based diet. Right? You're like, I'm vegan. I don't do eggs or, based on religion, based on culture, I'm not going to eat pork. Right? All of those things I can predict. And the goal is not the omelet, right? The goal is that you're able to have breakfast. And so, what a lot of us tend to do as educators is that we understand interpersonal variability. We understand kids are different from each other. And so we make the omelet and then we say, okay, you know what? There's going to be some who can eat the omelet. I'll just make something different for every single one of them. And so I'll make Brecken, oatmeal, and a chai latte. I'll make Bowden chocolate chip pancakes. I'll make Aylin a yogurt parfait. Now I want you to imagine my morning right now because it is a disaster. I'm getting up early. I'm going to the chickens. Side note, postscript, I don't own chickens, but imagine if I did, right? It would be a lot of work. So I go and get the chickens. I make the omelet. Torn comes down. He's like, this is great. And then I make everything for the other kids. There's only four of them. Some of you have 30, 50, 90, 300 learners that you're working with if you're working at the secondary level. And then Aylin comes downstairs and she's like, ew, gross. I'm not in the mood for yogurt today. And you're like, I give up, right? And really, when we started thinking about this as parents, my husband and I said, why are we making them all breakfast? Right? Why are we doing that? Instead, why don't we say, these are the ingredients we have. These are the tools that we have, right? We have a toaster and, we have these butter knives and these are the tools. These are the ingredients. And let's help them to learn how to make their own breakfast. That's what independence is all about, knowing that they may not make the same thing every day. And in schools, we tend to say to students, this is how you learn. This is what you need. And that doesn't embrace intrapersonal variability, which is that their needs are always changing. And so if I have the yogurt, if I have the oatmeal, if I have the eggs, doesn't it make more sense? And it's way less work for me to say, okay, so we're going to try all of these different ingredients. I'm going to work with you to make some of these recipes. And I want to get to the point that you're then able to make these choices for yourself. And this is what learner agency is all about. And I think that even educators who do embrace firm goals and flexible means, who do recognize the value of variability and the need for all learners to build more independence and more agency, they don't think about the need to explicitly teach the skills that are necessary to build learner agency. So as much as we talk about the science of UDL as a design framework, as a way for me to provide firm goals and flexible means, we have to weave in another lens, which is the importance of learner agency. And so this is a rubric that unpacks learner agency into these 5 different constructs. A child who has agency, an adult who has agency, is very self-aware. They know what their strengths are, they know how they're feeling, they know what their challenges are, and they're able to really step back and think about where they are based on context. Because what we are capable of on our best day is very different than what we are capable of on a really hard day. We also have to take some sort of ownership and initiative to advocate for what we need. Now, before anyone goes down the road with what about students who have the most significant intellectual or developmental support needs, I stand by this with my whole life and my whole heart, is that the most important life skill there is consent. And everybody can communicate consent, even if it is not traditionally verbal. We can see based on just cringing and body language and eye movements and pointing and augmentative communication when someone says, this is working for me and this does not. And so when we're talking about self-awareness, the developmental beginning of self-awareness is that students are able to identify what they want. What they want. And every human being in the world is able to communicate in some way what they want. And when people say to me sometimes, well, I don't think you understand, Katie, we're working with a child who, fill in the blank. Some students are not traditionally verbal. Some students are operating, with some very challenging, lagging skills. And what I always say is, from the moment I had my babies, from the moment these babies came into the world, and they were not verbal, and they did not have great gross motor skills. I knew when they needed something different, right? I knew that. I knew, gosh, this baby is hungry. Gosh, this baby needs a change. Oh, this baby is tired, right? And how? Is we pay attention. Everyone is communicating all of the time, this and not that. And why wouldn't we give every human a choice because of that? And so the developmental beginnings of learner agency is flexibility. So it talks about, what am I going to choose when I am given a choice? Do you want this for lunch or do you want this for lunch? Do you want to work alone or do you want to work with a partner? Do you want to read this or do you want to listen to it? To share what you've learned, is it better for you to write it or do you want to tell me? Right? That is where it starts. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most responsible choice, because developmentally, we have to weigh 3 different things when we are making choices. The first is what we want. The second is what we need. And the third is logistically what is possible. Okay. So I don't go through life only choosing what I want. Over time, I start to figure out, even though I want that, that's really not great for me right now, or I just don't have time to do that. And so what you'll notice here is, wherever students are here, we have a responsibility as adults, if we have created a climate that is safe, that kids feel welcome, that kids feel connected, we have to meet them all the way down here, all the way down here. Because the first time that I say to learners, in order to make notes, would you like to, as I'm talking, take some Cornell notes? Would you rather do dual coding, which is words and pictures, concept mapping, sketchnoting, or would you rather do generative note making, which is more of like a freestyle? Most adults do generative note taking. So we actually just kind of generate ideas as we go. We make sense of it later. And so the first time that I say to my middle schoolers, how do you want to take notes? They're like, well, sketchnoting kind of looks fun, but they really don't know how to do any of the three. So I have to explicitly teach all three and say, let's just try it, my loves. Right? And let's talk about how we can make it more accessible. But I want you to know that there are three different ways to make notes. And let's talk about how we can do it digitally if you have access to electricity and digital, how we can do it working alone, how we can do it working together. Let's share what we're learning. I'll create some anchor charts, right? Let's try all of these different things. And as we're trying all these different things, I'm going to help kids to start thinking about which of these actually works best for you right now. It doesn't mean it's always going to work best for you, but which one of these work best for you right now? And then I want you to think about every single time you try something new, like, how did it go? Come on, try it. Like, how did it go? Right. But now it starts to make more sense that engagement is like, you can't feel scared to try new things. You have to have this classroom environment where kids can explore. Now, if they've explored all the things and they're self aware, they're going to start to slip to here, which is okay. What are you going to choose today? Why are you going to choose it? And they start saying, like, I'm going to choose this because, and this is where I can back up a little bit more and say, okay, cool. Like, I'm here to support you. Your classmates are here to support you. I'm still going to check in and say, okay, so tell me, how's that working? Do you need to do something different? How is this going for you? Right. But what you'll notice here is, like, we as the teacher have to say, this is a strategy you can use to determine if this is working for you. And then to say, and it's okay if you have to change. Now, what is really interesting about what you're looking at right now is this, these are the kindergarten rubrics. Kindergarten. Kindergarten. And the truth is like, as students get older, you say, but I work in high school. This is developmentally where it begins. So go back to the developmental seed and say, you know what? I'm going to be providing you with some choices. And I realize that you might not know what works best for you. And I want to create a space that gives you an opportunity to explore, to recognize that when the conditions are right, you're going to be more successful. And I want you to feel prepared to make decisions to get those conditions for yourself so that you can advocate for what you need in whatever way you're going to communicate. And I will see you. I will work with you. I will work with your families. But this is about saying, if this is what we're working towards, here are some options. Try some different things sometimes. Wow, I am noticing that when you do that, that's some of the best work I've ever seen. Again, don't get stuck on it because it might be different another time, but look at you. Right. This is an environment that is motivating, right? That kids want to be there. And we cannot create this flexibility in a class where kids are scared to try new things, where kids can't make revisions, where kids are scared of what their classmates are going to say. Okay. And so this environment piece is so, so, so important. So as we kind of come to our last pause here, is how does Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework that helps us to think about how we design so that we embrace variability, so that we're focused on firm goals and flexible means, while also thinking about learner agency. Now, the way we design based on the science is we think about the barriers to engagement, recognition, and assessment. And then we eliminate those barriers through design with the UDL principles. So firm goals, flexible means designing with multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression, while also building learner agency. So when you're providing the flexibility, you're able to create a space where we say, this is the non-negotiable goal. This is what we're all working towards. These are the parameters. And so which of these works the best and why? And some days we might have, I used to call it a no thank you bite, because my grandmother would always say, just try it, right? You can always say, no, thank you, I don't want it, but let's all try it, or at least observe me doing it so that you have a sense of what it might look like. So this last piece here, how does UDL leverage the science of learning to develop learner agency, but also why is this different than just saying, well, I'm trying to be fun, or I tried choice, it didn't work, right? This isn't a fun meter. It's like, I want to make learning accessible and worthwhile because all kids can and will make progress towards their learning when we get the conditions right. So, last 2 minutes here for you to share your thoughts, to share your reflections, to share your questions. And again, as a reminder, if the music is distracting, please click mute. All righty. And so I am at the end of my presentation here, but I wanted to just leave space if anyone has any questions, any burning questions. I know it's a lot. I teach an entire graduate course on the science of universal design for learning. So this is very much an overview, but I want to give you an opportunity to pose questions in the chat if you would like. And while you're doing that, I just want to go back to the purpose of our time together today, and then I'll answer any questions and then hand it back to you, Ken. So, the goal today, of course, was to learn more about the UDL principles, which is more about the science of UDL. If we want all learners to learn, they all have to be engaged. They all have to be able to make meaning and understand instruction. They all have to be able to share what they know. And so, given variability, we have to design with firm goals and flexible means, because if we don't, simply the learning will not happen. Just like if you don't turn on the thermostat and the burner isn't working or the blower isn't working, you're not going to get heat in your space. We also learned a little bit more about how to use those UDL guidelines to, once you can identify a barrier, the considerations are all of the evidence-based strategies that you can try. And to reiterate, it's not about trying something once, right? It's really about creating a culture and a climate to ensure that that option is always going to be available to learners. And you can see how it comes together in those UDL look fors. And then lastly, firm goals and flexible means is simply just not enough because some students don't have the skills yet for learner agency, and or they haven't been able to explore all the different options, so they really don't know what's going to work best for them. They just simply haven't experienced it. And so we're asking them to make a decision about what's best for them with a number of different things that they never learned how to do. And that will just lead to frustration, and it will not necessarily lead to higher outcomes. So those were our goals. So coming back to the thermostat, and as you can see, you had a number of different options to access instruction. Some of you are live, some of you will watch the recording. Some of you put on captions, some of you are just listening. Some of you followed along on your own slides and maybe translated them and, explored these different resources. But ultimately, it comes down to what is going to work best for you. And even when I asked you to express your learning, it was, would you rather use a notebook? Would you rather just take a moment of think time? Would you rather pose something in the chat? So trying to model as much as possible in this virtual space, how I can embrace the variability of all of you, or the World Rotary Club can do it as well, and ultimately give you these options and choices. So thank you so much. I don't see any questions. So Ken, it's headed back to you.
I appreciate it. There's always the best word to describe what you is like, wow. It's a wow, a 3-letter word, but it really describes what you're talking about. And anybody who has questions, please raise your hand and we'll go to them. Maybe we can bring Sonia back in here again. But I remember going back to my years in school and a long time ago, and they took all our students, including myself, who were considered how should I phrase it? Low intelligence, I guess. I don't know what. And they put it all in one category. They were probably all those students that were in that category were probably neurodiverse, probably students at that point, but they had no clue. So I feel sorry for all the students like myself who didn't have the opportunity to learn this way, but I'm very happy about the future that this is now available, and hopefully we can start spreading the word on a global level. I don't know, Kate, if you want to shut off the share, that would be great. Okay, good. Thank you. Theo, you have a question?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. This was really, it was really great. Learned a whole lot of new things. What you have there, we don't necessarily, I wouldn't say we don't have in Namibia, but it could definitely, we only have it up to a certain level. Now, we've got children who are intellectually disabled, if I may put it that way, Down syndrome, autism, and other disabilities that really affect the the mind, if I may put it that way. And once they finish their schooling is really it's it's a curriculum where they don't necessarily need to write exams, but they 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 basically progress from one level to another until they reach the age of 18 or 21, and then they are sort of sent home, meaning they complete the process. And we don't seem to have a plan, or within the country, what to do with these kids next, which means we're trying to work with these children, specifically in the agricultural sector, to have them do something. But there's not much that you can teach them to learn except practically. And what you've just shared with us now really helps a lot. So, how can one put up a curriculum that really helps a diverse number of children? Because some of these kids who are coming into the program, they have various other disabilities that do not affect the mind, but they would also want to be involved in the program. And that's what we actually want to look at. So would this be something that we can also adopt in Namibia to
Oh, yeah.
do? Yeah.
I think yes, absolutely. Um, Another thing that might be helpful is, in addition to having the knowledge and the skills that students need to learn, which is very much about the nature of each discipline. Like, we want them to learn certain things about science. We want them to learn certain things about maths. We want them to learn certain things about literature. And that is providing students with access to a well-rounded education. But also, I've worked with a number of different organizations, countries all around the world, that in addition to that, they have a requirement to treat something called, it's called a lot of different things, but it's called transferable skills or core values, or it could be portrait of a learner or portrait of a graduate. I'm putting all of those in the chat. They could be called any of those things, and they're called different things. But essentially, what it comes down to is that there are some organizations that say, in addition to ensuring that we are teaching students how, or more about how to write, how to read, more about science, all of those different things, right? We also are going to not only teach, but assess and report on how students are building empathy, integrity, right? Because those are skills that, regardless of where you go after school, whether it's the relationships that we have interpersonally, whether there's an opportunity to go into the world of work, right? Um, Having the opportunity to be self aware, having the opportunity to communicate in the way that you are able to, again, to share consent, to make choices, being able to solve problems and be innovative, those are really important skills. And so, one of the things that I'm going to show you a slide that I always make for schools, districts, organizations when I am working with them, to try to show the value of having these core values or their transferable skills, and a community can come together. But I think that this makes a little bit of sense, hopefully. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Okay, here we go. So, every organization in the world has some sort of mission and vision, whether it is stated or not. Most organizations do have it stated. And every school I have ever worked with will say something like, our mission is to prepare students for their future. Our vision is that every student we educate goes off and lives a life of purpose. Sometimes people say, we want to make sure that every student is college and career ready. And we see a lot of language in mission and vision statements that say all students, each student, every student. Okay, great. And so what I always say is, but what does that actually mean? Right? If all students go out into the world and they're successful, what does that mean? And that's where we get into this kind of portrait of a graduate is if you have this mission to prepare students for the world, what does that mean today? It means that they are global citizens. It means that they are invested in their community. It means that they are critical thinkers. It means that they go on and on. And the core values might be different depending on your community, but coming together as a community and saying it is very important that the children that we serve not only learn about science and maths and literature, but they also learn how to be good humans and, make decisions for themselves. And so the next question is, okay, so what does instruction have to look like for students to build those skills? And this right now, this is mind blowing to people because if you say that all students have to be able to collaborate and communicate, then that means when I walk in and I look at classrooms, I should see a lot of explicit instruction on what it means to collaborate and communicate. So, an instructional framework or an instructional vision, it's sometimes called, is this is what we believe great instruction is. And this great instruction is going to ensure that our students build these skills so that we can reach our mission and vision. And so it helps to build coherence to say, even within a country, if you have this vision in, I believe you said Namibia, if this mission is that, public education prepares students for a life of service, a life of meaning, that means that every student is going to build these skills. And so, how do we design instruction so that they can build it? And I have never once worked with any school and looked at their vision and mission or their core values and not said the classroom has to be universally designed. Because no one's saying our goal is that our kids sit quietly like robots so they have academic skills. That's not our vision. We don't say one of our greatest goals is quiet and compliance. That's not our vision, right? We want kids to connect. We want them to imagine. We want them to set goals. And so I think that sometimes the missing piece between this is our mission and vision and instruction is like, but what actually are we wanting students to build? And if we say students who have these really significant support needs, we need to help build independence. We need to help them be a part of their community, then we have to create inclusive spaces from the time they are in kindergarten until the time that they graduate.
So, Katie,
Thank you.
author of 17 books. Wow, I don't know how you find time to write all those books, but you just finished your most recent one, which is called what?
The UDL shift.
Ah, very cool. And we can get it on Amazon, can we?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and all your books are on Amazon, correct?
Hmm.
Okay, good. So, I think if anybody else has a question, I think we can take a few more. If you want to raise your hand, that would be great. But I'm wondering from our Rotary standpoint, because I think we've kind of taken our mission to improve inclusive education on a global level as best we can. And I think we've talked about this before, but what do you think we need to do to get universal design for learning more acceptable on the global level, Katie?
I mean, the United Nations has already endorsed it. I mean, it is on the global level, right? Like it's just, I think, how do we get people to learn more about what it actually is? And so I think, there are so many countries that kind of signed on to this inclusive agreement of saying we will educate all students. And the United Nations in their declaration for people with disabilities talk about the importance of, if we really want education to be a human right, if we really want, my shirt says inclusion is not a choice, right? It's a moral imperative. There should be no system that has the power and the privilege to say to a family, to say to a child, you are not included by birthright simply because we don't feel like we can meet your needs. That's public education is for everyone. And so, if we want inclusion to not be a choice, we have to not only say, okay, so that means we have to design learning for all students, but really understand what that means, which I think a lot of people just simply haven't had access to professional learning to reimagine that. And I also think sometimes the same countries that are saying that it's important to universally design learning create unnecessary barriers for teachers that prevents them from doing just that by having a curriculum that makes teachers feel like they have to rush through it, by having these standardized assessments that are kind of hovering over, by not providing access to professional learning and things like that. And so I think part of it is simply, when I work with educators anywhere in the world, I'm going to say 98% of feedback is like, yes, this is awesome. We want to do it. But I can't tell you how often I go places that people said I've never even heard of it. So in some ways, it's just that we just need to all continue to share that there is a framework, based, in decades of research that essentially I was in elementary school when researchers at Harvard created this framework and started doing this brain research. And we just have to keep spreading that there will never be a time that we're not trying to meet the needs of all kids. This is not a fad. This is not something we are already doing, because if we were already doing it, all kids would be included and all kids would be learning. And so I think it's really just kind of continuing to share that there is a framework that is designed to help educators think differently about lesson design so more students have opportunities to learn at high levels while also building skills that will help them to be successful beyond schooling.
Thought. I mean, there is another issue too, and I think we've talked about it too. The teaching schools, or whatever you want to call them, there are only a few that are teaching UDL to the teachers. Is that correct? I think we did some research. I don't know if you've ever gone to a school like Framingham State and talked to them about it, but
I do.
okay, good, because they need to get that into their curriculum also, for teachers to learn. So. Okay, if there are no other questions, once again, let's see. How is somebody going to reach you, Katie? Do you want them to reach us through the club, or do you have an email they can reach you?
My email is very simple. It's katie@novakeducation.com. And the answer to the standardized testing question is I have a blog where I answered it. And then there's a very short podcast in it as well that just talks about, again, I so wish that we were not up against these standardized tests, but I also recognize that there needs to be accountability for schools and districts and learning. And I think people are kind of struggling how to do that in an efficient way. That being
Mm-hmm.
said, is I will not teach in an inaccessible way to prepare students for an inaccessible test. I will not do it. So I'm going to teach in a really accessible way and then help students understand how they can then transfer that knowledge to something that is more standardized. And as Daniel kind of asked, when it comes down to like, why is this important? Like sometimes I would say, you know what, in the long run, my loves, you're probably not going to go into life and use what you have learned about literature a lot. But literature helps us examine the human condition. It helps us look at characters as people and understand why people do the things that they do. It helps us to build humanity. And that is something that you will carry with you, even if you didn't like that book. Also, what we know is that literacy is liberation. Being able to make meaning out of text, and I use the word text really loosely. It could be data, it could be media, but comprehension skills transcend what we see in printed text. Being able to understand the world around you and being able to communicate your true thoughts, right? That requires an education in literacy. So again, maybe this assignment feels like it's not worthwhile, but ultimately it's exposing you to another author's words. And you might say, gosh, maybe that's a way that I could communicate. So I think sometimes we have to realize that it's a bigger picture here. And for standardized tests, what I used to do, and they loved it, is I would say, I always would do a lesson on the psychology of multiple choice. I would get real deep into the psychology. I was telling them they're going to get brainwashed. We watched every single thing we could. on helping teachers create more rigorous multiple choice tests. I let them choose any topic that they wanted and create ridiculous multiple choice tests for each other and for me. It could be on anything. It could be on their pets. It could be on, games that they were into. It could be on World Cup soccer. I didn't care. But we really got into that psychology of understanding multiple choice tests. We took nonsense multiple choice tests, right? How do you use the strategies you've learned to play this silly game? Because ultimately in my real life, I don't take multiple choice tests. And like we almost made like a game of it. We also did that for if you ever have to like write exams, to look at, I want you to look at 6 exemplars for students who got full credit on their exams last year. And I want you to create a recipe for what they did. And I'll never, ever forget this because it was so ridiculous. Is they had to they could give presentations or they could make like a pamphlet or whatever. And so I said, okay, listen, we have this Massachusetts state assessment. You're going to have to write an essay. They release a couple of items every year. Here are the highly released items that I can use as exemplars and like really get in there, get dirty with them. What do they have in common? All of the groups, right? One group is like, oh my gosh, we figured it out, Novak. I'm like, what? They're like, you just have to use color words. It's like, what are you talking about? They're like, all of the narrative essays just list colors over and over. Look at this. They don't say, I went to the beach and went in the sand. It's so cheesy, Novak. It's like the turquoise waves crashed on my 10 feet as the golden sand. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think you might be right. So I went to a local hardware store where you pick paint colors and I asked them, I'm like, I'll bring them back, but can I grab all of the paint chips? Because we're just going to memorize a bunch of colors. So we played games where I would show a picture and they had to write it, right? It was ridiculous. I have never in my career had better exam scores than that year. And I'm walking around and I'm like, oh no, they're overdoing it. And I can't intervene because I'm just I'm the test proctor. And it is ridiculous, right? My grandmother's couch, the color of burnt toast. And I'm like, oh no, we're going down for this. We're going down for this. And they nailed it that year. I had like the highest growth score in the district. But we had fun with it to say, listen, like this is a genre. This is a genre. And very few people write essays for a living. However, if you know how to figure out what does success look like, you can take that in sports, you can take that in relationships, you can take that in home improvement projects. And so we just had like a fabulous time preparing for a standardized test. And I did not teach in that standardized way, but it helped them to see how they could be successful in situations that weren't ideal.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. Well, really appreciate every time you visit us, and hopefully you'll come back again. And anybody who wants to get more information about the club, you can write to us at RotaryWDA@gmail.com. That's RotaryWDA@gmail.com. Where inclusive education is one of our major projects that we work on. And if you want to join us on that, please do. Again, thank you, Katie. Much appreciated. And we'll be in touch with you very soon.
Okay, everyone, have a beautiful day.
I'm going to start reading all your 17 books. I'm going to work on it now. So.
No, don't go way back. Like they're dated. Start with UDL Shift.
Okay, will do. Thank you. All right. Take care, Katie.
Thanks.